Neighbor demanded I sell my house. You can't afford this area. Flipped it for double, now he can't afford to stay. Moving to Silver Pines was supposed to be a fresh start. After Mark died, I needed somewhere different, somewhere to rebuild myself from the pieces. We'd always talked about getting a place like this, a big house with a garden, somewhere quiet but close enough to life so I'd never feel isolated. And when I finally took the leap to buy it, I could almost feel Mark smiling. The first few months were peaceful. I planted hydrangeas along the fence, just as I'd dreamed. I set up Mark's old office as my own little reading nook, complete with his favorite green armchair. I felt grounded for the first time in years. Then, I met Brock. Brock came off, at first, as the kind of neighbor everyone would love to have, overeager to introduce himself, offering to help with yard work, always dropping hints about local events. He had that classic, suburban charm with a bit of an edge to it. Brock seemed to think of himself as Silver Pine's unofficial welcoming committee, and to his credit, he knew every family's history, every home's quirks. He even remembered birthdays and anniversaries of people he'd known for years. It was impressive, but also, a little much. "So, Callista," he said on one of his first visits, leaning against my freshly painted fence. "Do you mind if I call you Cal?" I gave him a polite smile. "I actually prefer Callista." He nodded slowly, tucking his hands into his pockets. "Callista it is. Unusual name, isn't it? Pretty, though. Strong." "Thanks," I replied, uncertain where he was going with this. "Anyway," he continued, "I was just popping by to say, welcome. Silver Pines is, well, it's special. People tend to stay here for a long time if they can handle it, I laughed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a layer beneath his words. "I'm hoping to be one of those people." Good. You got family in town?" "No," I replied, glancing down. "Just me." "Ah," he said, nodding in that slow, thoughtful way again, as if I'd just revealed some dark secret. "Well, you ever need anything, just holler. Silver Pines looks out for its own." Over the weeks, his visits became more frequent, his tone more intrusive. One day, as I was hauling bags of mulch from my car to the garden, he appeared in his typical, unannounced fashion. "Callista," he began, eyeing my bags of mulch with barely veiled judgment, "there are some great landscaping services around here. They do wonders. It might be, more manageable for someone like you." "Thanks for the advice, Brock," I said, a hint of annoyance slipping into my voice. "I like doing things myself." Of course," he replied, holding up his hands. "I just know it's a lot to maintain. I mean, you're on your own, right?" "Yes," I said, feeling that familiar, prickling sensation when he brought up my situation. "I'm managing fine." "All right," he said, finally stepping back but not before muttering, "just don't want you getting in over your head." That line, it felt like he was trying to plant something. A tiny seed of doubt. A whisper that maybe I didn't belong here. I shrugged it off, determined to enjoy my space. But Brock's subtle jabs became more obvious over time. At neighborhood get-togethers, he'd lean in just a little too close. "So, Callista, you sure everything's all right with the mortgage? Houses in Silver Pines, they're not cheap." "Oh, I'm sure you know," he'd add with a knowing smile, glancing around to see who was listening. It was infuriating, but I tried to ignore it. Then came the afternoon he caught me as I was getting out of my car. "Callista," he started, with a forced look of concern, "I've been thinking about you. This house. You don't want to end up stretched thin, just in case things get tough financially, I'd be more than happy to make an offer." I stopped, one hand on the car door. "An offer? For what?" "For the house, of course," he replied, giving me an overly innocent look. "I mean, Silver Pines can be demanding. Sometimes it's just easier to take the cash and settle somewhere a little less intense." He said it with such smug certainty, as though he was doing me a favor. My face must have betrayed my anger because he quickly added, "I'd be fair, of course. Market's hot, but I'd cut you a deal. Help you out." "A deal?" I repeated, barely able to contain myself. "Brock, I'm not selling my home. I'm just getting settled." He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just a suggestion, Callista. I've seen a lot of people get in over their heads here. It's not easy when you're alone." I knew he was trying to hit a nerve. But it was as if he had just called my bluff. Suddenly, I wanted to make a point. "Brock, I appreciate the concern," I said, my voice dripping with forced politeness, "but I've been doing just fine without anyone's help." For a moment, I thought he'd let it go. But as he left, he gave me that irritatingly familiar smile and said, "Well, you know where to find me, when reality catches up." The nerve of him. But I wasn't about to let Brock get under my skin, not when I'd worked so hard to get here. Still, his presence seemed inescapable. He'd accidentally show up while I was out walking, or drop by to talk about neighborhood matters. He even went as far as mentioning at a gathering, loudly enough for others to hear, "People don't realize what it takes to keep up in Silver Pines." One morning, I saw him outside with a real estate agent, pointing toward my house. When I asked him about it later, he waved it off with a laugh. "Oh, just showing some friends around," he said. "This area's in demand, you know? High value, exclusive." The audacity was mind-blowing, and part of me wanted to confront him there and then. But I knew better than to let him see that he was getting to me. It was around then that I got a call from an old friend, who worked in real estate. She mentioned offhandedly that property values in Silver Pines had skyrocketed, thanks to the new train line reopening nearby. My jaw practically hit the floor. My little house was now worth twice what I'd paid. And suddenly, I had an idea. With this new information, an idea started to take shape in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more tempting it became. I knew Brock had no clue about the property boom. He was still trying to act like he had the upper hand, convinced he was the king of Silver Pines, the gatekeeper of some exclusive club. It was time to let him taste his own medicine. I called up my friend to confirm the details. Property values in Silver Pines had surged, and houses like mine were in demand. My little home could fetch nearly double the price I paid. As much as I loved the place, the thought of getting a fresh start, with a nice profit, no less, became more appealing by the day. And with the right buyer, I knew I could make a real point to Brock. One Saturday afternoon, I saw him in his yard, clipping the edges of his perfect lawn. His smugness was almost palpable, as if he could sense I was thinking of giving up. I walked over, feigning innocence. "Hey, Brock," I called, giving him my best smile. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the stress of keeping up with the house." He looked at me, eyebrows raised in that oh-so-condescending way of his. "Finally coming to your senses, are you?" I nodded, letting him believe he'd won. "You might be right. I'm considering selling. But with property values going up, I'm thinking of testing the market a bit. Just to see what I can get." Brock's face dropped. Clearly, he hadn't anticipated this. "Oh, really? Are you sure you'd find buyers willing to pay much?" "The market's tricky, Callista. I could give you a fair offer, we could handle it directly. Quick and painless." I forced a smile. "That's kind of you, Brock. But you know, I'm curious about what a realtor could do. They're saying there's a lot of demand in the area." "Demand?" he repeated, eyes narrowing. "Well, I mean, sure, but it's not like you'd be able to." "Anyway." I cut him off, keeping my tone chipper. "Thanks for the advice. I'll let you know how it goes." For the next few weeks, I made a show of talking to realtors, inviting them over for house tours, and even having an appraiser come by. Brock's curiosity, and frustration, was impossible to miss. He started bumping into me even more, offering unsolicited advice about the right kind of buyers and how he could help if things got complicated. One evening, I got an offer that was well over what I'd expected. When I mentioned it to Brock in passing, his face went white. "You're seriously considering selling to someone, outside?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You know what kind of people come here from the city. They don't understand what Silver Pines is about." "Oh, but they're paying top dollar," I replied casually. "I'm sure they'll adapt just fine." The next morning, I accepted the offer and started packing. I didn't tell Brock, but word spread fast, and soon the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. I could see Brock seething every time he looked at my house. He started making snide comments about outsiders and neighborhood character at every community meeting. But what Brock didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his troubles. With the new development nearby and the spike in property values, the county reassessed taxes. Brock's property taxes, like everyone's, shot up. But while my new buyers were prepared for the hike, Brock clearly wasn't. He cornered me one afternoon as I was packing up the last of my boxes. "Do you know what you've done?" he hissed, his face flushed. "By selling at that price, you've driven up property values all over the neighborhood. My taxes are through the roof." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not hiding the satisfaction in my voice. "But I thought you'd be happy, Brock. After all, isn't this what you wanted? For Silver Pines to be exclusive, high value?" He spluttered, searching for a comeback, but nothing came. I turned to head inside, pausing only to deliver the final blow. "By the way, Brock," I added, smiling, "thanks for all the advice. It really helped me get a great deal on this house." And with that, I shut the door on him for good. The day I moved out, I saw him standing on his lawn, staring helplessly as the new owners moved in. A young couple, with 3 kids and 2 dogs, loud and full of life. I waved to them as I drove away, and they waved back, cheerful and oblivious to Brock's sour expression. As I turned the corner, leaving Silver Pines behind, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Brock had tried to push me out, and in the end, it was his own greed that trapped him in the very situation he'd feared. And me? I had a new life to look forward to, and a pocket full of cash to make it happen.